Back in power, the party that ruled Mexico with an iron fist wins the presidency. Will it lead the country towards a more secure and prosperous future? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. It wasn't the resounding victory that polls had predicted, but preliminary results show the candidate of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or PRI, has won the presidential election. Enrique Pena Nieto promised his term would be, quote, modern, democratic and transparent, as opposed to the autocratic style that defined his party's rule for more than 70 years. The PRI's victory was also a rejection of the current President Filipe Calderon's policies. He will leave behind a stagnating economy and a war against drug cartels that is raging out of control. At least 50,000 people have been killed since Calderon launched his military campaign against the drug cartels in 2006. Pena Nieto's challenge will also be to convince the more than two-thirds of Mexicans that didn't vote for him that he will bring the change they need. Al Jazeera's Latin America editor Lucia Newman has more from Mexico City.
After one of the most hotly contested political campaigns and an election which brought out record numbers of voters, Mexicans are now absorbing what this newspaper has managed to sum up with one word. It says regresan. That means they are back or they have returned. This, of course, a reference not so much to Enrique Pena Nieto, the man who will be the next president, but to the political party that he represents, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or PRI, which ruled Mexico for 71 years through corruption, authoritarianism, and often through vote rigging. Now, Mr. Pena Nieto has wasted no time trying to distance himself from that past. He says that he will combat corruption. He says he wants to have a policy of reconciliation with all the different political tendencies, including the left, and he says that he will lead a PRI party that will be a modern democratic party, a party of the 21st century, as he put it. In fact, he even said that this was the PRI's second chance and that he would not let down the Mexican people's confidence. The headline of this newspaper quotes Pena Nieto as saying there will be no return to the past. Now, it's important to keep in mind that Pena Nieto won with more or less 38% of the votes. The final tally won't be known until July the 4th. But that means that more than 60% of Mexicans did not vote for him, and that explains why out on the streets of Mexico there are very, very mixed reactions to his victory.
If Nieto helps us, we'll support him. We came from the state of Mexico, and there he promised many things that he fulfilled. We hope that he will do the same as President of Mexico.
I think this one is going to be just like Calderon, just as corrupt.
Let's give PRI a chance. We'll see if they have changed or not. What happened is in the past. But what I don't want is anything to do with PAN, the outgoing party.
Another interesting aspect of this election is that the PRI had gone for what it called the full hand, that is, control not only of the presidency, but also the Senate, the Congress, the state congresses, and all of the municipalities. But they did not get what they wanted. In fact, as it turns out, both the Senate and the Congress are equally divided, more or less, between the three main parties. None of them have a simple majority. So that very clearly shows that the Mexican people are willing to give Mr. Pena Nieto a chance, but not full reign.
So, will Mexicans be better off with Pena Nieto in power? To discuss this, we're joined by Eric Hirschberg. He's the director of the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies at American University. From Mexico City, we have Mexico's former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Manuel Camacho Solis. He was also the former mayor of Mexico City. And here in the studio, we are joined by Manuel Suarez. He is the former chief of staff for the governor of the Bank of Mexico. Thanks to all of you for joining us. So the results are in. The PRI, or PRI as they are known, regains power. Now the big question is, what does it all mean? But first, let's start off with what gave them power. Because, you know, if you remember, this was the party that at one time had a reputation for being authoritarian, for being unjust, for being corrupt. In fact, the Mexican writer Mario Vargas Llosa called them the perfect dictatorship at one time. Now they're back. How do you explain that, Manuel Suarez?
Well, it's very simple. First of all, the PRI has never been a political party. It's an electoral machine. Created back in the 1930s in order to avoid Mexicans to have to kill each other to succeed to power. If you look at Mexico's history in the 19th century and early 20th century, there was either revolution, chaos, or dictatorship. So this was an idea to institutionalize the transition of power. And it worked fairly well for that purpose. It was not democratic, but it worked to avoid a blood battle every time the power passed on. So from 1934 onwards, you have a change of baton every 6 years regularly without any trouble. And it worked until things started not working all that well. And if you wish, we can get to that in a minute. Mm-hmm. But by the year 2000, the last...
That's when the party was thrown out. Right.
Pre-president, who was not very much of a apparatchik, worked very hard to make sure that his successor was from some other party to appear as the father of the new democracy.
Okay. Well, you know, Pena Nieto has, to all intents and purposes, won the election. Let's take a listen to what he had to say to supporters shortly after the polls closed. Let's have a look.
Today, Mexicans have chosen a transformation. Mexicans have given our party a second chance. We will honour it with results, with a new way of governing, according to the demands of a 21st century Mexico. The fight against crime will continue, with a new strategy to reduce violence and to protect the lives of Mexicans before anything else.
Okay, that was Pena Nieto, the president-elect of Mexico. Let's go to Mexico City, to Manuel Camacho Solis. How big a change is this for Mexico?
Well, it's a limited victory. They were expecting a landslide, and finally they did not get a majority in either of the houses. The difference in votes is much closer than what they had advertised. And the point here is, who is really Pena Nieto? The man who is talking about modernity, democracy, in transparency, once he has won the election using means contrary to those that he now defends. Is he the governor of the state of Mexico, who was not democratic, who was authoritarian, and who was part of a link of corruption within his own state? Or after all the pressures of a campaign and finding out that 2/3 of the country are against him, he will change and have a different reaction? So we will see what happens. Up to now, fortunately, he did not get the full power, and the rest, it will depend on what he does. We hoped that he changes, but up to now, his record is not what he says.
Okay, Eric, why was the incumbent party, the PAN, so roundly rejected by voters during this election? Because they put in place some very controversial policies, especially when it concerns the war on drugs, some of their economic policies. But we didn't hear much detail from this party, which is, you know, the party of Pena Nieto, when it came to those very issues.
Well, keep in mind that when the PRI moved out of power, lost power in 2000, it was succeeded by the first of two PAN administrations, that of Vicente Fox. And it was after Fox's first administration, the first democratically elected administration in Mexico, that we had the 2006 elections that gave rise to Calderon. And I think one of the reasons that the government candidate was so roundly rejected is that there's widespread dissatisfaction with that experience of a dozen years of PAN presidencies. And there's dissatisfaction because the economic performance of Mexico has been below expectations and below what the country needs. The progress toward making institutions more transparent and accountable has been frustratingly slow. And in particular, the signature issue of the Calderon period, the militarization of the war on drugs, the war against organized crime, has taken an enormous toll. 55,000 people roughly are estimated to have died since Calderon came to office. And that's a very potent combination of factors have made it very difficult for Calderon's party to succeed him in these elections, and indeed his candidate came in third.
Right, two big issues that dominated this election. That was both of which you've mentioned, the economy and the war on drugs. Let's take a look at that latter issue, the war on drugs. One of our reporters, one of our correspondents in Mexico, Adam Rainey, is in, I think, a place which you'd call the epicenter of that war, Ciudad Juarez. He's been there, he's been talking to people who've been affected by this war. Let's have a look at his report.
There have been more killings in Ciudad Juarez than any other place in Mexico amidst its drug war. Just during the first 5 years of outgoing President Filipe Calderon's term, 16,500 people were killed in this city. And of all those killings, just 4% of murderers were convicted and sentenced to jail. In fact, there have been so many killings here that cemeteries like this one we're standing in, they're literally running out of space to put all the bodies. Now, we've talked to lots of families and loved ones of victims in recent days, and they tell us they've lost almost all hope in the ability of authorities and elected officials to address their concerns. Here's what one father who lost his son that was murdered at a funeral has to say about justice and security in Juarez.
They never arrested anyone. They never told us they were investigating. Since then, we've heard nothing. With a new government, you don't know what's going to happen, but I think it will be difficult for them to control the violence.
One father's concerns over security and justice here in Juarez, and there's thousands of people like him across this city who've suffered the pain of losing people they love, and they just say they want the new government taking shape to listen to them and hold people who commit crimes accountable.
So there we have our correspondent Adam Rainey there reporting on that brutal, tragic war on drugs in Ciudad Juarez. Later, I asked Arnulfo Valdivia Machucha, who's the campaign coordinator for the Pena Nieto campaign, what approach the new president will take towards Mexico's drug and crime problems. Here's what he told me.
Our candidate has said over and over during the campaign that the structural reforms for the country will be key. But it also will be key to maintain the war against crime, but through a different strategy. You see, what is being asked here is not if the Mexican state has to fight or not fight crime. The issue is how we fight crime. We think today that the strategy is tremendously violent, unnecessarily in some cases, and that some of the main crimes that the people that hurt people the most, that hurt citizens, like kidnapping, like robbery, murder, are not being properly prosecuted. So while we're fighting or actually concentrating all of the resources or most of the resources of the government and the state to fight organized crime in terms of drug trafficking, other crimes are being left aside or are not being fought correctly. And that's what's going to change. What's going to change is the strategy.
Okay, we had a spokesman there for the PRI talking about how the party will tackle the problem of drugs in Mexico. Let's go to Manuel Camacho Solis in Mexico City. Well, we heard there from the spokesman for the PRI. Do you buy what he's saying? I mean, he was very short on specifics.
I think that the number one priority now is to reduce the level of violence in the country. And we know that we have to change the approach. I agree that it's not the right approach just to think that you are going to solve the problem with the military and with the police. And we need judicial reform, we need more transparency, we need rule of law, and we also need very specific and broad programs of social development and for attending the youth in urban areas. And that new approach, I think, could be the center of a new consensus in the country. We will represent the second force in Congress. We are the second force in Congress now. And we would be willing to come into a national agreement in order to reduce violence if the contents are respect of human rights, rule of law, transparency, judicial reform.
Okay. Manuel Suarez, you know, when we look at Pena Nieto, when he was governor of Mexico State, he was able to tackle the state debt. His economic record was relatively solid. But we also heard there from Manuel Camacho Solis that he had a reputation for being corrupt, for being repressive, for being authoritarian. Are those valid criticisms?
No, I think they are grossly exaggerated. I think he did a very good job on the financial side. He hired a very competent man who by the way, ran his campaign very well. And that's one of the reasons that explains that he won by such a large margin. But he ran a very efficient, from a financial and economic point of view, government in the state of Mexico. I have no indication or stories of corruption. His finance man, I know him personally, and he's absolutely clean.
Right.
So I don't know if there's any element to make that charge. As to regarding the authoritarian
I would like to be more
streak,
specific.
the only charge that
I'll get to you in a moment, sir.
The only charge that they make is of an uprising in a small town that was very charged because they had been part of an attempt to build a new airport in Mexico City. And they had kidnapped officials of the state government.
Right.
And they were going to burn them. So the state police intervened to rescue them. And a brawl continued, and that's the charge that it's being leveled against Peña Nieto, completely bogus.
Okay, let me get a response from Mr. Camacho Solis in Mexico City. Go ahead.
Yes, I think that his Secretary of Finance in the state government, Luis Videgaray, he's a competent economist. That is not the discussion. The discussion is if he has protected or not corruption. He protected the previous governor who stealed hundreds of millions of pesos from the state, and he never did anything about it. In terms of elections, I mean, it's difficult to imagine a more controlled and rigged elections than the ones he made in the state. But it's not my word. It's what the citizens of the state of Mexico think. In the last election of governor, they defeated the left in a relation of 3-1, the PRI. Now, 1 year later, the difference was 5% in his state. Mm-hmm. So there is a tremendous reaction of the own citizens of the state against the way that the government is dealing with these issues to make such a difference possible. But we are not going to discuss about if he's going to be or not. Yeah. What's important is that we accept that we have these problems in Mexico: corruption, lack of rule of law, and unless we really go deep into making this country much more honest, transparent, and democratic, I think we will keep repeating these histories of horror that I think that in any other place of the world could never be accepted, at least in the democratic world.
All right, Eric Hirschberg, in many respects, Peña Nieto represents the new face of PRI. You know, they're trying to put the old guard behind them. But, you know, there are critics who say, look, you know, he may be the new face, but he's just a proxy. You know, he's just a proxy who will still be representing the interests of that business elite, the dinosaurs, as they sometimes derisively called in Mexico. Do you think that's a valid criticism against him?
Well, I think that what now needs to happen is to determine whether Peña Nieto is going to enter into the kinds of coalitions that Manuel Camacho Solis refers to with regard to the security question across a whole variety of areas in which Mexican society is in need of reform. And the degree to which he's able to build consensuses, to build alliances, and to enact important reforms across a series of domains is what will tell us whether this is a new generation of the PRI or not. I mean, I think that to try to establish an either-or is perhaps misleading. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are elements of continuity in the Revolutionary Institutional Party today and in the past, but there have also been important changes, and the party is not a monolith. One thing that I would say, though, and here I disagree a bit with my friend Manuel Suarez Mier, I don't think that the electoral results are so encouraging for Pena Nieto or suggest that the campaign was so successful. I mean, when you think about it, he's running against two candidates, one of whom represents continuity with a singularly failed government, and in fact with two consecutive failed PAN administrations. And the other candidate is, the candidate of the left, is somebody who never should have been a candidate. There was no way he was going to win. He had performed so badly in the aftermath of the disputed election of 2006 that he wasn't a viable candidate. And that running against those two, Pena Nieto still doesn't get 40%, to me actually suggests that he has a lot of convincing to do outside his core base.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Interesting point that Eric brings up there. The electorate may have given Pena Nieto the presidency, but they didn't give him the other things that the PRI wanted, which was like the municipalities, the legislature, for instance. That's a good thing for Mexican democracy, isn't it?
I think a selective vote by the electorate is a very good thing. Mm-hmm. And I agree completely with Manuel Camacho that the word now, from now on, is negotiation. And what I expect and hope is that Pena Nieto is first of all able to form a broad-based government in which he calls the best people, disregarding party allegiances, number one. Number two, he has to get rid of the dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs are not only the tycoons that you mentioned, but the leaders of corrupt labor unions. And we have many of those. I understand that he didn't do it until now because he was campaigning. He was trying to add up, not divide or rest. So, but he now has to have a very clear campaign to deal with those and sit down with the PRD, as Manuel Camacho suggests, or whoever is willing to sit down and negotiate interesting, important reforms that are needed for Mexico, right, to move through and to get at the problems that have been mentioned. Because all of us agree that corruption and all of these problems have existed in all governments. By now, we have had governments of the PRI, the PRD, and the PAN at the local and state levels, and all of them had the same problems. We have to go to a stage in which we have the institutional capacity to deal with them.
Okay.
Building institutions is what makes the difference.
Okay, Mr. Camacho Solis, are you confident that Enrique Pena Nieto will form a government, a broad government, that will represent the best interests of Mexico rather than the best interests of his party?
Well, that was not his idea. He wanted a majority in order not to have to negotiate with anybody. He even wrote an essay about the need to make a reform to over-represent what he got in the House of Representatives. So those are not his convictions, but I hoped that the difficult realities that he has lived in the campaign, the opposition, the pressures of the students, all these will make him feel and think differently than he did in the past. And I hope that he chooses a competent cabinet. I don't see the conditions for a national unity government. But if he chooses a competent cabinet, and as Eric says, if he starts really showing capacity to negotiate agreements, well, that could make this easier to overcome, to almost 65% of the population, which are quite angry.
Okay.
That's something that we have to accept. I mean, a lot of people are really angry because they were not only in favor of other candidates, but they were very much against him. So he wants really to overcome all these resistances. He will have to act quite different than what he acted when he was governor of the state of Mexico.
Okay, Eric, we have 40 seconds. We've got Pena Nieto is promising growth rate of 6% around there. It's going to be almost double what it is right now, and a vigorous effort to stem the drug war. Do you think he's going to be successful?
I am very skeptical that he will be successful in either one. I think that neither he nor the other campaigns were sufficiently clear about strategies for dramatically increasing growth and improving distribution in Mexico. and I don't think that they've been willing to take on some of the really fundamental issues with regard to the drug war and its consequences, beginning with renegotiating the terms of engagement with the United States, which is certainly central to the entire problem.
Which is another issue completely. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We've run out of time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
That is it from the team here in Washington, D.C. for now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program, and you can find out more on our website. Go to the program section at aljazeera.com.